Why don't you let everybody know kind of your background, schooling, how you came up to be, on this pursuit to being an engineer?
Definitely. So, hey everyone, my name's Andrew. I'm a working engineer. Just graduated last year and just took my PE exam and wanted to talk to you guys about my experience with a computer-based PE. I have about 1 year of work experience, so still pretty new, but was told to take it as soon as possible to keep all that school knowledge in there. So yeah, just hopping on to talk with Rich and tell you guys about my experience for those of you who are hoping to take it soon.
I have also been told the same kind of lingo of, well, take it as soon as you can so that you don't lose that ability of knowing how to study from school and everything. But I also know in my personal experience, I say this a lot, when I came out of college, I didn't know how to do anything. I didn't know how to do anything in comparison to what engineers do on the day-to-day in the professional world. So from that perspective, for me, I learned everything in my career to allow me to then take and pass the PE. For you, what are your experiences? Do you know, I guess, have you felt that you've learned more in the professional setting or in the school setting?
I would say that my experience in school, I was lucky that it helped me prepare for the exam, I thought, quite well. A lot of the classes I took were geared towards miscellaneous engineering topics that even helped me on the breadth portion of the exam. Having a year of experience in work, I work with certain materials. I dive deep into certain materials rather than broad. So on the exam, when you're seeing every possible material, and you're like, man, I haven't done a masonry wall since school, or I haven't done virtual work since school.
Mm-hmm.
There are topics like that that we don't see every day in the office. So those were helpful to sort of remember back to my school days. And even taking it so soon, I had still forgotten a lot of those things and had to go back and do some looking. But I was happy that I made the decision to take it as early as possible because I think it gave me an advantage. I think there's a good balance of things that I learned from school and things that I learned from work that helped me prepare for this exam in different ways.
For those studying for the PE, I've talked about it before. Right at the beginning, you want to check the NCES because they give you a surprising amount of information about what to expect on the test. And I know, Andrew, I talked to you a little bit beforehand about that you had checked that out. What are some things that they kind of, bring to light for anyone studying out there?
I would definitely recommend checking out everything the NCES
Yeah, true. I'm butchering
has
it
to
probably.
offer. I know. Everything they have to offer in terms of test prep materials. So they have an exam outline that I highly recommend looking at. That will provide you with a list of exam topics for the breadth and depth portions, as well as the applicable codes for your exam. So, and that's something I will probably get into here in a minute. But some of the additions of the codes were different than I was expecting. So had to make sure to account for that as I was studying. A lot of the other study material I was able to find online. There are plenty of courses and guides out there that you can find as you're preparing. As far as practice exams go, I would highly recommend doing the official NCES practice exam. That's the most accurate in terms of what you're likely to see on the exam question-wise.
So I want to hear a little bit about checking the code additions for the exam.
Yes.
What happened there?
Yeah, so in my day-to-day work, we typically use the most recent editions of codes or the most recently adopted editions of codes.
Mm-hmm.
So for concrete, for example, we're currently using the ACI 31819. And we're using the ASCE 716 for loading criteria, et cetera. I expected going in to be studying those codes for the exam. However, it was when I was answering some practice questions, actually, I had gotten that far into my studying when I looked at a practice question solution and found that the answer was a bit different than I was expecting. And they were referencing the ASCE 710, which had a different equation than the one I had used from 716. And I thought, that's odd. And I looked back at the NCES and saw that it specifically says ASCE 7 2010 edition. So even though we're here in 2023 taking the exam, the NCES is still using some of those older versions. So make sure you have the correct version of the code when you're studying. Navigating those codes for me was the most important and critical part of the computer-based exam. That's really what the test is about. So being familiar with the right version of the code is really important.
So I took pen and paper. So I had all my, speak of the devil, I had all my tabs and stuff. Some of you know on the channel that I'm studying for the SE right now. Still pen and paper, so the way that you move more quickly through a code is with all your tabs and cheat sheets and stuff like that. That's like dinosaur thing of the past. This new computer-based, which I know nothing about because I haven't taken it, how do you move quickly? How did they expect you to move quickly through the codes without the way that I just showed?
There were two important components that I used as I was navigating the codes. One of which is the bookmarks, and the second was the search function. So thankfully, as you're navigating these PDFs during the exam, NCES provides quite a few helpful bookmarks for you in each code, sometimes going all the way down to subsection. So you can scroll through the bookmarks and find the exact section you're looking for. Say I'm looking for concrete column capacity or concrete column detailing. I might be able to scroll in the bookmarks, find that exact section right off the bat instead of having to scroll through the code.
Okay.
Another option is what we like to call Control F, or the classic search function of the PDF. Which actually performed pretty well. I was surprised at how quick it operated during the exam. You can search for any term within the code, within the PDF you're looking at. So it's worth noting that some of these codes were broken up by chapter. So rather than searching for a term within an entire code, sometimes you can only search for a term within a single chapter of a code.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So that made the test slightly more challenging in terms of navigation. I'll bring up an example. The AISC Steel manual is broken up by chapter on the test. So you can't look at the code as a whole. You can only look at it chapter by chapter. So if I'm looking for something specific, I have to know what chapter to be in before I start searching, before I use the search function. Become familiar with the chapter numbers. You don't always have to know exactly where something is.
Yeah.
But I had a moment on the exam where I was thinking, oh, what chapter in the Steel manual are the shear and moment diagrams? And I have it tabbed.
It's a good point.
Code. But I was like, what chapter number is that? I'm not sure. So I had to go
as I look down to my tab.
Yeah, exactly. So some pros and cons with the navigation for sure. But again, this computer-based test is very much based on your ability to navigate the codes.
Okay. Awesome. That's really good insight. That's a different skill than I went into the test taking under the different formats. So that's great to know. Everyone who's taken it pencil and paper, you show up at some big convention or fairground or whatever, and you enter the big arena, and there's 1,000 scared, sweaty engineers there with their suitcases of 1,000 books ready to rock and roll.
Yeah.
I'm guessing it wasn't like that.
Yeah, that's I'm familiar with that format from standardized tests in school, but no, this one's very different. The computer-based test is administered at a computer testing center, which you can find, for me, was Pearson. I believe that might be the same for other states.
I think they were the FE, if I remember that correctly.
Yes, it was that way for the FE as well, where you go to a testing center and there are maybe 15, 20 computers in a room, and people are taking tests of all sorts. So you might have people there taking their nursing exam or their exam to become a security guard, were a couple examples.
Man.
As I was talking people in the waiting room, right? And so these are exams of different lengths, of different types. So you have people coming and going from the testing room pretty regularly. They do their best to keep a quiet environment, and there are quite a few rules and stuff you'll have to read. It's pretty high security in there.
Yeah.
So before you go in, they check your pockets. You have to scan your palm on a palm scanner.
Wow.
To make sure it's you. They have all sorts of measures like that. But yeah, everybody's in there kind of doing their own thing. But it's a different environment for sure. It's interesting because, someone next to you might be taking an essay-based exam. So they might be typing away over there while you're trying to.
And you're like, what question are they on? What are they? Like, how long is your answer?
I don't think I got that question. But yeah, so it was entertaining talking to some others in the waiting room there were a couple people taking the FE as well. So
interesting. Wow. That's, my, a buddy of mine, who took the SE a couple years ago, he told me a funny story about, so he had a lot of people do the suitcase thing on wheels, like you're going through the airport. And he's like, the number one thing I'd take away from the exam, he ended up passing it. He's like, I ended like slightly early, so I was allowed to leave. And he didn't realize his like roller bag wheel was broken. So he packed up all his stuff as it's like crunch time in the SC, and it was in a big facility. And he was like way in the back. And he had to roll his suitcase out, and it made a clicking sound. And it was just like, he said, like echoing off the walls. And he's just like click, 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 like the last 20 minutes of the exam. He's like, yeah, I like didn't know if I should go faster or slower to get out of there, but
just trying to hide.
Mm-hmm. What was your? I remember the PE exam, still question number one for myself and what I felt like. What were your feelings seeing that first question? And obviously, everyone knows on here we can't talk about the questions, but what were you feeling? What was it like?
I would say test anxiety wise, I've always been pretty nervous about exams, even in college, leading up to exams and taking exams. I had to be really careful about my mindset going in, because if I got too nervous, I could bomb something pretty easily, even if I felt like I knew it, because in the moment I was too nervous and, couldn't get the thoughts out. With this exam, I would say I was pretty nervous going in the morning. Walking into the exam center, scanning your palm, checking your pockets, doing all of that stuff is quite a buildup.
Yeah, I bet.
To that first question, right? They sit you down. You have a small section that teaches you how to operate the exam. That's a little sample section, so it shows you how to select the answers and how to use the line tool if you need it for graphs, charts, etc. Little things like that. So the moment that I got the first question was definitely a height of anxiety. Mm-hmm. So I took an extra minute to acknowledge my surroundings and say, okay, I'm here for the next 8 hours. This is my spot, and I'm going to take my time and we'll see how it goes. And just reminding yourself that you have time. You have time to relax, sit, and think. It's not a rush, and it's important that you understand each question to its fullest. So that really helped me get through the first anxiety hump there.
That's really good advice for anybody out there. Taking the time to have yourself understand the question. You can want to go past, it seems stupid, but we can want to go past that step just to get more time to work on a solution. But to not fully understand what they're asking you, like, you can waste so much time being like, oh, I wasn't even supposed to find this thing or that thing. I found that true for myself on the SE as well. You could want to, in the PE, the SE, the FE, whatever. I guess those 3 licensing exams, while we're nervous, you also want to show how much you know that you are capable and that you are ready, to be the next step of an engineer, and we can very easily get ahead of ourselves, I feel like. So that's nice advice.
I would say, going right along with that, since it's a multiple choice exam, they're going to use everything they can to trick you into selecting an answer that's not correct. So I would say there were numerous times where I was punching stuff into my calculator. I got an answer, and I was like, great, see it on the screen, click it. It's your first instinct to move on right away because you're thinking, I've only got so much time. I came up with an answer that is one of the options, so that seems right. Let's keep going. But it's worth it to take that extra minute to say, did I make the correct assumptions? Are there other answers that could be right, depending on mistakes that I could have made, right? Checking your equations, checking your variables, checking your units is one of the answers, divided by 12 and in feet instead of inches, So it's those little things that, taking the extra moment after you've selected the answer to double check your assumptions, I found that to be super valuable.
Totally. The old nominal versus strength level capacity. You're like, why wouldn't you put phi on it? It's like, oh, I didn't ask that. That's always every practice exam, those pop up and you're like, why am I off by like 10% for some reason? I could have swore I did that right. It's like, I guess I'm not multiplying by phi.
They will have an answer that doesn't have phi on it, and they will have an answer that has phi on it. So you want to make sure to read another good time to read the question carefully too.
Yeah. We all know that you have the breadth portion of the exam and then the afternoon depth portion of the exam, depending on which exam and type of engineer you want to be as a civil engineer. You're now done with the morning session and you have your break. Can you tell us a little bit about what the break experience was like? And how you used it?
Sure. So during the computer-based exam, you'll have one scheduled break during roughly the middle portion, as Rich mentioned, between the breadth and the depth section. When that break occurs, though, is up to you. So if you finish your breadth portion of the exam early, that is before the 4-hour halfway mark, you can choose to take your scheduled break. When you come back, you'll have extra time on the depth portion.
Really?
And I found that to be extremely helpful. Yeah.
Whoa.
So you have a total of 8 hours, and how you break it up, how it breaks in the middle is up to you, depending on how early you finish your breadth section.
So is there a cap on the time I have a bunch of questions now. is there a cap on the time for the morning breath? Like, or can you just hang out in there for 6 hours and...
You can hang out as long as you want, but you'll only have access to the first half of the exam until you hit end, take your break, and come back. And then it will give you access to the second half of the exam, or the depth half.
Gotcha.
When that switch occurs is based on how quickly you move. So going into the exam, I knew that I wanted to have a little bit of extra time for the depth section. So I was hoping that I finished the breadth early, which ended up being the case. I finished the breadth in 3 hours, took my break, came back, and then I had 5 hours to work on the depth portion, which ended up being exactly what I needed, because I ended with about 15 minutes to spare after checking over all of my answers. So
that extra buffer just kind of gave you that solidified feeling.
Exactly. And that might be different for everyone. You know, if people during their studies find that they need more time on the breadth portion, then go ahead and take that extra time, as long as you feel confident that you can continue and do the depth in whatever time you have remaining.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a whole new rule to the game. That one was like, yeah, for us it was 4 hours, you know, you're done. They come around, they collect, you get your allotted time, and then you're back in with a fresh, you know, afternoon session. And if you were done early, that just means you got more break.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
So a little different format there.
Yeah. It's, man, I don't know what I would have been. I feel like I would have putzed around in the beginning more, because I'm like trying to figure out how to do hydrology or whatever. And I'd never done any of that in my life. And then in the afternoon, it felt like I was able to move more quickly, just because it's like, oh, it's what we do kind of thing. But definitely, I definitely though have, I can't say for sure what I would do, because I also had the same mindset of you, as like the afternoon is going to be more, you know, in depth. They're going to get, even though it's still multiple choice, it's going to be more involved. I need to be on my toes a little bit more, because it's what I'm showing I know how to do best. So that's a tough one.
Yep. It's all based on how comfortable you are with those codes. And that goes for the breadth portion too, because the breadth portion, rather than navigating your material codes, you're going to be navigating the NCES handbook to find those equations you need for whether it's hydraulics, traffic, whatever other topic your question is. You're going to be navigating that handbook constantly. So that's another item, another code book to add to your study list to get familiar with is the handbook.
A question I have for you, that because I reviewed that reference manual on my channel, just wanted to see what was inside of it, you know, all of its secrets. I don't have it next to me, but it seemed like it was skimpy in structural content. Were you allowed to use structural codes in the morning?
Yes.
Okay.
I was allowed to use any code during any part of the exam. Even though I didn't use most of those structural codes in the morning section, they were available to me.
Okay. All right. That's good then. So I'm guessing that means there was like more advanced like water resource codes and stuff and traffic codes, and that you were just like, no thanks.
Luckily, I do think the codes that they provide you are specifically tailored to your exam. So for civil structural, there is a list of codes that I have available to me, and those are the ones they gave me.
Got it.
So you won't see some codes that other disciplines might use. Say you're taking the civil transportation test, they might have some other codes specific to transportation But those I didn't have access to.
Okay. Okay. So it may still be that it's tailored specifically to the test. It's not just here's 1,000 codes, use whatever you feel like you want to use.
Another little interesting caveat is that, like I had mentioned earlier, when you finish those first 40 questions, there are 80 questions in total. So when you finish those first 40, that's your first half. You can take your break. I assumed it would be a direct, even split between breadth and depth. But to my surprise, some depth questions bled over into the morning. So at the very end of my breadth questions, I was getting some structural questions that I needed to use the other codes for. So I was happy that I had access to those.
Yeah. In your opinion, what is the most important thing, concept, design, methodology that you solidified while studying for this test? If you could only choose one.
If I could choose one personally, it would be design of concrete members. I would say that's something that I don't do often just because of the nature of the work that my company does. But I had forgotten a lot of the theory, a lot of the design standards and practice for the ACI. And you'll run into a lot of ACI related questions on the exam. The ACI is notoriously difficult to navigate.
Yeah.
So
it's our favorite over here.
Yeah. Becoming familiar with, is that equation in the beam chapter, or is that equation in the sectional strength chapter? Or is that equation in the detailing chapter? That sort of thing was super important. Familiarizing myself with the Whitney stress block, the mechanics of concrete.
Yeah. Yep. That's a good one. Yeah, that I definitely advanced my knowledge on that for sure during the PE. Mine's gonna sound so primitive now in comparison to yours. Mine was stress and strain, believe it or not. Just like bare bones. Because when I was studying all the practice exams and problems I had, I feel like a large majority, the test or the practice problems broke it down to asking for stress a lot of the time. Just for some reason, in my experience, the problems I got my hands on. And the stress part I knew a little bit more, but to really get it, and then also its relation to strain and what strain actually was, I didn't know it back then. And that was the thing for me.
And that's back to basics again. It's like, for something like that, it's beneficial to remember, back to your classes in college for stuff like that. I would say doing my practice exams, I definitely ran into that, those stress strain problems, deflection, axial deflection, bending deflection, your classic PL over AE type equations, understanding different moduli of elasticity between materials and how they interact.
Yeah, mechanics of materials was like, I kind of skirted by this in school just enough.
Yep.
But man, every single one of the concepts I learned in school are critical are the base of all structural engineering. And it was oops, I should have known this better.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people out there can relate to that. And going back to those mechanics of materials courses and knowledge is important as well. And I, before I took the exam, I think I would have had the same answer. But after taking it, just my experience with my version was more geared towards the materials, but yours might be different. Every version of the exam is different. So it's good to brush up on everything.
Yeah, for sure. And everyone is unique with the holes that they have in their knowledge, what they know, what they're not great on, what they are great on. Even great and structural engineers out there, if you're not that jack of all trades, or you're not heavily interested in every material, you could be only interested in concrete, and that be your entire career.
Exactly.
And because you enjoy it, because that's all you want to do is reinforce concrete, and you get rusty on doing wood or doing like you said, masonry. What was I gonna ask? And the funny thing about it is, going back to basics, at least in my experience, talking with my principals and project managers and really, really smart people who have been in the industry for a long time, they're not talking about this, these high level concepts and analyses to explain something. Everyone's still breaking it down to like, well, just think about it. This is pushing on this, and then that's pulling on that, so that's in tension, and this is bending this, and that's doing that. So what does this mean? Like, at least in my experience, that seems to be how every engineer talks to one another, is like the most basic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I would agree that.
Oh my gosh, we have a subscriber. Hey, thanks for subscribing during our chat, but you got to get out of here.
Yeah, going back to that sort of the vocabulary of engineering knowledge from school is super important. Stress, strain, all of that stuff that we don't really talk about. Moving loads, I would say, is another topic that I honestly didn't cover in school. The concept of influence lines, figuring out where...
We got some great ones on the channel, Andrew.
Great examples. Go check them out right now.
Shameless plug.
Yeah. Influence lines, knowing where to apply your loads to get your maximum moments and forces within the section. Mm-hmm. And I would say you're almost guaranteed to get a question on that. I ran into that a lot in my practice, and got a couple of those questions on the exam.
Yeah, I would say influence lines, I dodged them a fair amount of time until, again, the SE came up for me, and kind of that light bulb in the head going off of realizing why they are a useful tool. Because up until then, I was like, Reeza's going to tell me where the worst case is. I know how to apply moving loads to that, or, I know, I can use the steel manual, moment, and shear diagrams for 99% of the cases I run into. But where it struck me was, when I actually had to learn about bridge design in AASHTO, where you have a bridge deck, and most of the time you have some X amount of girders going across the bridge, and then you have a slab on top, and you have cars all over the place, and both across the deck and along the span of each deck from pier to pier is like, there could be cars, an infinite amount of patterns all over that bridge at any given time of its lifespan. And how do we determine what the maximum forces are to design for? And it's like, boom, before computers, influence lines. It's like, I get it. It's like a little roadmap to tell you where to apply, to where to get your max moments and shears, blah, blah, blah. When I got exposed to that in school, me and my friends all looked at each other like, these are just jacked up moment diagrams that don't make any sense. Like, they're just like,
Exactly. That was my experience too. We had a professor that was introducing them in school, and we were going, what are we ever going to use this for? It seemed super odd. Mueller-Breslau the concept of using deflections to understand
Yes.
influence lines, right?
Yes.
So diving into that while I was studying, I was going, oh boy, what is the significance of this? But the more I looked at it, the more it dawned on me how important and how applicable it is. And in my opinion, is something that we should use more in the industry or talk about
Totally.
more in the industry.
Totally.
Especially with pattern live loading, pattern loading in general.
Anybody out there studying who has no idea what's going on right now, it's okay. If you look it up, though, you're going to go down this whole magical world. But you know what's so funny? The kicker for me, and what I try to express on the channel, is level of making that connection of why something's important or why it's useful to you as an engineer.
Yes.
I think we're like that with everything. Like if we can't realize, I think that's why like teenagers, they don't listen, can't focus in school and they're not doing, their math homework. But while you have to get, I'm going way off the rails here, while you have to get a general knowledge or a general education, if we don't get that spark to be like, oh, this will make my life easier or this will help me, I get why this is a useful tool, then if you're going to sit there and not understand why an influence line can help you, I know I'm not going to get through a lesson on influence lines. I'm going to be like, dude, I'm done. That's what I was like in college. It was just like, I can't right now. I'm still trying to figure out moment diagrams. I'm still drawing those upside down. But finding, because we study so long for these exams, and, spoiler alert for anyone entering the industry, in any engineering industry, you just continue to study throughout your career because you need to figure stuff out. That's why you're an engineer. So rant over, but the moral of the story is search for that kind of spark as to why you're doing what you're doing and how it's going to benefit you. Be selfish a little bit. Be like, oh man, now I can do this task at work so much easier because I can use influence lines. And no one else is doing that, but I'm doing that. Now I can get it done quicker and I can, show off or whatever.
Taking that initiative to do your own thing sometimes is worth it. If you think you have a more efficient way to do something, go for it. Talk to your supervisor about it. Talk to your mentor about it. Or just check it out. See what kind of results you get. And it could be something that makes your work more efficient.
Okay. I'm going to pivot here a little bit as we wrap up. So the test is over, but I'm going to rekindle all of those painful hours and nights, I'm sure.
Oh,
Can you give us a recap of how long you studied and what that looked like for you?
I signed up for the exam back in May of this year. And for those of you watching this later, I just took the exam. We're here in September. So I signed up, what is that, 4 or 5 months beforehand? 5 months?
Math checks out.
Yeah. So I knew I had time. I knew I had time ahead of me. I didn't start studying right away. I started about 3 months before the exam, 2.5 to 3 months before. And that is what I would recommend to anyone out there. And everyone's going to be different as far as your study schedule. But the first thing you want to do before you start studying is make a schedule. You want to be able to cover every topic that you can possibly see in this exam. And the challenge with the PE, I think potentially more so than either the FE or, I can't speak to the SE, but potentially the SE, this is the largest test personally that I've ever taken in terms of breadth of material. There is so much to cover that it just takes you a long time. And
Totally.
there's really no way to get around it. So coming up with a schedule that I'm going to study this topic this week, this topic this week, this topic this week, schedule it out. That way you have enough time at the end. So roughly what my study schedule looked like is I gave myself about 1.5 months to study the breadth portion of the exam. And for those 6 weeks or so, I tried to stick to 1 to 2 topics per week. So you're talking hydrology and water resources, you're talking transportation, you're talking construction, means and methods, materials, soils. Taking a look at all of those topics on the NCES exam guide will give you an outline of how many weeks it's going to take you to get through those. So keep in mind, I'm also working during this time. So weekdays, it could be a struggle. You know, when you're coming home, you're like, I don't really feel like studying after work. I'm tired. So I started out studying just on the weekends, and that worked for quite a while. As I got towards the end of my study session or closer to the exam, I found that I was running out of time. So that's when I started to hit it on weekdays too, after work. And that was because I had to. Whatever works for you is obviously the way you should do it, but you want to study in a way that helps your brain best. When I'm tired and I'm trying to study, I don't retain anything. So finding time in your schedule to schedule studying in a way that you can absorb the information. So back to my outline. So we're talking a month and a half for breadth, and then about a month for depth. And the reason I scheduled myself a month for depth is I wanted 1 week for each material: concrete, steel, masonry, and wood.
Okay.
So then once I was through breadth and depth, I had about a few weeks left, 2 to 3 weeks left, for just practice questions, which is exactly what I was aiming for. Once you study everything, you want to simulate your exam as closely as possible. So I held off on taking that NCES practice exam until the end because I really wanted to test myself and see if I was ready for the real thing.
Good for you. I was too weak. I cracked into it.
You're like, oh, I kind of wonder what's in here.
It was just mocking me. Yeah, it's like, well, let's just check it out. You know, and then all of a sudden I'm on problem like 8. I was like, crap.
Yeah, I tried to keep it a surprise, but there are definitely other practice exams you can find out there. I took a number of them. I think I took 2 or 3 practice exams in total. But the NCS is the most accurate and the one that will really give you a measure of how you're doing study-wise. One other thing I wanted to add as far as study materials, and this is just personal preference, personal experience, as I was studying for the exam, I took advantage of the EET for studying the breadth portion of the exam.
Okay.
And I took advantage of the AEI, Advanced Engineering Institute, for the depth portion of the exam. I found those 2 resources to be instrumental in studying, and really all I needed, in addition to all of my codes and other supplementary materials to answer the questions. But in terms of study guides, I would highly recommend those.
Awesome. That's great advice. There's a lot of chatter throughout the channel that, what's the best one, or should I, sign up for a class or not a class, and a reference material or a different type of test. Who's the best? Who's the worst? Who simulates the best? So that's great to hear that you had I've heard a lot. AEI is, at least from what I'm hearing, is kind of the top-ish dog from perspectives of people, not someone who's, a third party and is like reviewing it or whatever. It's like real people in there doing it. And they're like, yeah, it turns out most people lean AEI material. And I'm not familiar with EET.
I was not familiar with EET either before I started looking. EET is Engineering, Education, and Training. I was able to find a slideshow that was presented with various PE preparation materials and topics, complete with explanations of the concepts and practice problems.
Oh, sweet.
So there's a lot you can find out there. You should definitely pay for it.
We're always, yeah, everybody.
Always pay for it, everyone.
Never use your resources. Don't use the internet.
Don't use the internet to find stuff.
Never.
Okay.
Never. Always through the proper channels at all times. Stick to the books. We're engineers, god damn it.
I would say the good news is all of the practice problems I found throughout these resources prepared me very, very well for my exam. I would say that ultimately the exam questions I found to be lighter in difficulty compared to the majority of the practice questions that I did. So that I felt good about and really helped me to go in confident on the exam. Because when you're in the heat of the moment in the exam, if you run into a question that you're like, whoa, I've never seen this before, I'm not sure, it can really throw off your game, So you want to be able to go in there, be confident about your answers, be confident about the knowledge, because it's hard work to study for this exam. And it's really worth it when you go in there and you feel like you know your stuff. And can get those answers. So.
Totally. To get that problem under a stressful environment that feels lighter to you, I feel like totally changes the tide of the entire exam versus just the opposite. One that's a little bit harder than you were expecting. You're like, oh, I'm in for it.
Yeah. That first question, like you mentioned, Rich, like seeing that first question and going, oh no, or being like, oh, I got this.
Yeah.
Like that can be the difference right there.
Even if the second one then is really hard and you don't know it, I feel like for some reason it's that first one that's like, I belong here.
Yep.
And then the second one, even if it's difficult, you're like, I'll move on from that. I'll tackle it later. Let's keep getting into this.
Exam questions are typically one-offs. They don't typically lead into each other, at least from my experience with the computer-based exam. You will have assumptions given to you. You'll have variables given to you to help you solve the problem. You might be asked for one small part of the problem. But like Rich mentioned, those questions A through E, you're not going to get that type of question. They want to focus in on your ability to do one very specific thing with each question. And that's how they do their evaluation.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap it up here because I think my key light's going to die any second. So, if it goes dark, it's not the ambiance. It's my crappy setup. Actually, my setup's really great. Sponsored by, well, not really sponsored, but charitable from Dell. That's not part of this shtick, but I've never shouted them out ever, and I've always wanted to. They're amazing. They made all this possible. But, okay, let's a little more fun as we wrap this up. Personally, for you, in the structural engineering realm, what is one thing that you aspire to work on? It could be type of building or, whatever. And then what is one thing that in the past few years, it can be since you started working, or this could have happened at the end of school, that you have shifted away from as an engineer? So basically, you thought you always wanted to work on this type of thing, and as you've gotten more knowledgeable, you're like, my passion's changed.
I would say I look forward to diving into things I haven't seen before and trying new building types, new materials. Most recently, I've sort of taken the dive into the mass timber realm of things. And I found it to be fascinating and really the way of the future in terms of building design. A lot of new and innovative products and systems, even lateral systems with mass timber. So finding those little niches that you're interested in is super important. I've moved more in that direction and away from having the desire to work on those like big those shining projects, right? Mm-hmm. Those ones that the ones that you want to be known for, right? The ones that you say everyone knows about that building, everyone's seen that building, and having a part in that is really, really cool. And coming out of school, I was like, oh yeah, I just want to be a part of something amazing, which is not bad at all. That's not a bad aspiration to have, of course, but when it comes to the day-to-day work, which is what matters to me anyway, coming home every day and going to work every day, I want to work on something sustainable, I want to work on something that I feel comfortable going back to every day and then I can continue to enjoy, right? So while those big high budget projects look cool when they're completed, the day-to-day of working on a very, very small part of something huge can be tedious and can be taxing.
You feel mentally. Like you're not, a drop in the bucket kind of thing.
Exactly. And that's not to say, there are plenty of engineers out there that work on huge projects for huge companies and probably very much enjoy it. So, this is just coming from a personal opinion on what projects I'd like to work on.
Cool. Yeah, I know mass timber, a lot of hype around it. There's a lot of great energy around it. Any project I've been fortunate enough to work with it, there's a lot of great people. It's funny because it's an old practice from a European standpoint through history, mm-hmm. but it's also a very new practice because of technology that is being implemented into mass timber, making it more accessible and more mm-hmm. scalable. Is cool, and everyone just seems really excited about it, which is fun. Well, awesome. I appreciate it, Andrew. I'm not going to hold you up anymore. I guess, I don't believe you have any type of channel or social media, but if people do have questions, they can either go through my channel, or if you'd like to give anything that they could reach you on, let them know.
Definitely. I'm pretty non-existent on social media, but if you guys want to ask questions in the comments of this video, I'll be checking in there, and I'd be happy to answer some of those for you guys. So.
And he told me before the show that he's only exclusively answering questions from people who subscribe, smash the like button, ring the notification bell, do all the YouTube algorithm best practices. Otherwise, he said, absolutely not.
All of the above. And you might get a heart from Kestava on your comment too. So
look out for it. Well, cool. Yeah. So if everyone does have any questions, anyone of any kind, you don't have to subscribe. You don't have to do anything. But, it's free. But if you don't want to, I get it. Whatever. It's fine.
It's free. It's fine.
You may see a response from Andrew with his recent experiences taking the computer-based Civil PE structural specific exam.